The endocrine system consists of a lot of different glands, but they're all controlled from one location. And so that's in the brain, and it's the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So those two glands work very closely together to regulate the other hormone-producing glands in the endocrine system. So they're located right here in the brain. The hypothalamus is above the pituitary. And so here's a closer version of that. And so we have the hypothalamus up here and then the pituitary. And there are two lobes for the pituitary, the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus is continuously monitoring the state of the body's internal environment, and then it's going to regulate the release of hormones from the pituitary gland. And the way it does that is different depending on which lobe is involved. So the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe are controlled in different ways. So first we're going to look at the anterior pituitary. So what happens is there are these specialized cells called neurosecretory cells within the hypothalamus, and they're going to produce releasing hormones or release inhibiting hormones. And they're going to put those into capillaries in the hypothalamus. Those hormones are then going to travel via the portal vein into capillaries in the anterior pituitary. And when they get there, they're going to stimulate the release or inhibit the release of another hormone. So it's like a hormone release cascade. So the release or release inhibiting hormone is going to cause the release or the inhibition of a tropic hormone from the anterior pituitary. And then that tropic hormone is going to enter the bloodstream and travel to another endocrine gland, so the thyroid gland or the adrenal gland, and then cause yet another hormone to be released. So often there are these three hormones in a cascade to cause an effect. So there's a stimulus, it comes to the hypothalamus, it's going to come in through a sensory neuron, it's going to cause the neurosecretory cell to release, in this example, a releasing hormone, the thyrotropin releasing hormone as an example. That's going to travel through the blood, through the portal vein, to the anterior pituitary, and then the anterior pituitary is going to release another hormone, which is going to travel in the blood to its target. So in the example here, thyrotropin releasing hormone goes to the anterior pituitary, secretes thyroid stimulating hormone, which is then going to travel to the thyroid and cause it to release the thyroid hormones. So the posterior pituitary works a little differently, is a little more simple. So again, you have these neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus, and they're going to make hormones, but instead of putting them in the bloodstream, they're going to pass them down the nerve all the way to the posterior pituitary. And then those hormones are going to be stored there and released when necessary. So the posterior pituitary is storing hormones and just waiting for the command to release them. And then those hormones will be released and go have an effect. So two of the very common ones that work this way are antidiuretic hormone, which we're going to talk about later, and oxytocin, which we've talked about a little bit already in terms of pregnancy. So just as a summary, right? So in the anterior pituitary, you've got neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus creating releasing hormones, putting them into the portal vein system to go to the anterior pituitary, which causes the anterior pituitary to release some sort of stimulating hormone to go to another endocrine gland. In the posterior pituitary, the neurosecretory cells make the hormones and send them by their nerve endings all the way to the posterior pituitary, where they're stored until they need to be released into the blood to go to their target.